Republic of the Philippines. Supreme Court. Manila. N-Bank. GR number 187167 August 16, 2011. Professor M. Magallona, Akbayan Party List Representative. Risa Hontiveros, Professor. Harry C. Roque, Jr., and University of the Philippines College of Law students, Elithia Barbara ACAS, Voltaire Alfiers, Sorina May Altas, Francis Alvin Asilo, Cheryl Ballet, Ruby Amor Baraka, Jose Javier Bautista, Romina Bernardo, Valerie Pagasa Buenaventura, Eden Marie Canet, Van Allen Dela Cruz, Rene Delarino, Pauline May Duman, Sharon Escoto, Rodrigo Fajardo III, Girly Ferrer, Raul Austin Ferrer, Carla Regina Gripo, Anna Marie Cecilia Go, Irish K. Colo, Mary and Joy Lee, Maria Luisa Manalese, Miguel Rafael Masji, Michael Ocampo, Jacqueline Hannah Pineda, William Ragamat, Maricar Ramos, Enrique Fort Revillas, James Mark Terry Rydin, Johan Franz Rivera IV, Christian Rivero, Diane Marie R.O.A., Nicholas Santizo, Melissa Cristina Santos, Christine May Tabing, Vanessa Entorno, Maria Esther Vanguardia, and Marcelino Veloso III, petitioners. Versus Honorable Eduardo Ermita, in his capacity as Executive Secretary, Honorable Alberto Romulo, in his capacity as Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Rolando Andaya, in his capacity as Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management, Honorable Diony Ventura, in his capacity as Administrator of the National Mapping and Resource Information Authority, and Honorable Hilario Davide, Jr., in his capacity as Representative of the Permanent Mission of the Republic of the Philippines to the United Nations, Respondents. Decision. Carpio, J. The case. This original action for the writs of certiorari and prohibition assails the constitutionality of Republic Act No. 9522, RA 9522, adjusting the country's archipelagic baselines and classifying the baseline regime of nearby territories. The antecedents. In 1961, Congress passed Republic Act No. 3046, RA 3046, demarcating the maritime baselines of the Philippines as an archipelagic state. This law followed the framing of the Convention on the Territorial Sea and the Contiguous Zone in 1958, UNCLOS I, codifying, among others, the sovereign right of states parties over their territorial sea, the breadth of which, however, was left undetermined. Attempts to fill this void during the second round of negotiations in Geneva in 1960, UNCLOS II, proved futile. Thus, domestically, RA 3046 remained unchanged for nearly 5 decades, save for legislation passed in 1968, Republic Act No. 5446, RA 5446, correcting typographical errors and reserving the drawing of baselines around Saba in North Borneo. In March 2009, Congress amended RA 3046 by enacting RA 9522, the statute now under scrutiny. The change was prompted by the need to make RA 3046 compliant with the terms of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS III, which the Philippines ratified on February 27, 1984. Among others, UNCLOS III prescribes the water-land ratio, length, and contour of baselines of archipelagic states like the Philippines and sets the deadline for the filing of application for the extended continental shelf. Complying with these requirements, RA 9522 shortened one baseline, optimized the location of some base points around the Philippine archipelago and classified adjacent territories, namely, the Calayon Island Group, KIG, and the Scarborough Shoal, as regimes of islands, whose islands generate their own applicable maritime zones. Petitioners, professors of law, law students, and a legislator, in their respective capacities as citizens, taxpayers, or legislators, as the case may be, assail the constitutionality of RA 9522 on 2 principal grounds, namely, 1. RA 9522 reduces Philippine maritime territory, and logically, the reach of the Philippine state's sovereign power, in violation of Article 1 of the 1987 Constitution, embodying the terms of the Treaty of Paris and ancillary treaties, and 2. RA 9522 opens the country's waters landward of the baselines to maritime passage by all vessels and aircrafts, undermining Philippine sovereignty and national security, contravening the country's nuclear-free policy, and damaging marine resources, in violation of relevant constitutional provisions. In addition, petitioners contend that RA 9522's treatment of the KIG as regime of islands not only results in the loss of a large maritime area but also prejudices the livelihood of subsistence fishermen. To buttress their argument of territorial diminution, petitioners facially attack RA 9522 for what it excluded and included: its failure to reference either the Treaty of Paris or Saba and its use of UNCLOS 3's framework of regime of islands to determine the maritime zones of the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal. Commenting on the petition, respondent officials raised threshold issues questioning 1. The petition's compliance with the case or controversy requirement for judicial review grounded on petitioners' alleged lack of locus standi, and 2. The propriety of the writs of certiorari and prohibition to assail the constitutionality of RA 9522. On the merits, respondents defended RA 9522 as the country's compliance with the terms of UNCLOS 3, preserving Philippine territory over the KIG or Scarborough Shoal. Respondents add that RA 9522 does not undermine the country's security, environment and economic interests or relinquish the Philippines' claim over Saba. Respondents also question the normative force, under international law, of petitioners' assertion that what Spain ceded to the United States under the Treaty of Paris were the islands and all the waters found within the boundaries of the rectangular area drawn under the Treaty of Paris. We left enacted petitioners' prayer for an injunctive writ. The issues. The petition raises the following issues. 1. Preliminarily. 1. Whether petitioners possess locus standi to bring this suit, and 2. Whether the writs of certiorari and prohibition are the proper remedies to assail the constitutionality of RA 9522. 2. On the merits, whether RA 9522 is unconstitutional. The ruling of the court. On the threshold issues, we hold that 1. Petitioners possess locus standi to bring this suit as citizens, and 2. The writs of certiorari and prohibition are proper remedies to test the constitutionality of RA 9522. On the merits, we find no basis to declare RA 9522 unconstitutional. On the threshold issues, petitioners possess locus standi as citizens. Petitioners themselves undermine their assertion of locus standi as legislators and taxpayers because the petition alleges neither infringement of legislative prerogative nor misuse of public funds, occasioned by the passage and implementation of RA 9522. Nonetheless, we recognize petitioners' locus standi as citizens with constitutionally sufficient interest in the resolution of the merits of the case, which undoubtedly raises issues of national significance necessitating urgent resolution. Indeed, owing to the peculiar nature of RA 9522, it is understandably difficult to find other litigants possessing a more direct and specific interest to bring the suit, thus satisfying one of the requirements for granting citizenship standing. The writs of certiorari and prohibition are proper remedies to test the constitutionality of statutes. In praying for the dismissal of the petition on preliminary grounds, respondents seek a strict observance of the offices of the writs of certiorari and prohibition, noting that the writs cannot issue absent any showing of grave abuse of discretion in the exercise of judicial, quasi-judicial or ministerial powers on the part of respondents and resulting prejudice on the part of petitioners. Respondents' submission holds true in ordinary civil proceedings. When this court exercises its constitutional power of judicial review, however, we have, by tradition, viewed the writs of certiorari and prohibition as proper remedial vehicles to test the constitutionality of statutes, and indeed, of acts of other branches of government. Issues of constitutional import are sometimes crafted out of statutes which, while having no bearing on the personal interests of the petitioners, carry such relevance in the life of this nation that the court inevitably finds itself constrained to take cognizance of the case and pass upon the issues raised, non-compliance with the letter of procedural rules notwithstanding. The statute sought to be reviewed here is one such law. RA 9522 is not unconstitutional. RA 9522 is a statutory tool to demarcate the countries, maritime zones and continental shelf under UNCLOS 3, not to delineate Philippine territory. Petitioners submit that RA 9522 dismembers a large portion of the national territory because it discards the pre-UNCLOS 3 demarcation of Philippine territory under the Treaty of Paris and related treaties, successively encoded in the definition of national territory under the 1935, 1973 and 1987 constitutions. Petitioners theorize that this constitutional definition trumps any treaty or statutory provision denying the Philippines sovereign control over waters beyond the territorial sea recognized at the time of the Treaty of Paris that Spain supposedly ceded to the United States. Petitioners argue that from the Treaty of Paris technical description, Philippine sovereignty over territorial waters extends hundreds of nautical miles around the Philippine archipelago, embracing the rectangular area delineated in the Treaty of Paris. Petitioners' theory fails to persuade us. UNCLOS 3 has nothing to do with the acquisition or loss of territory. It is a multilateral treaty regulating, among others, CU's rights over maritime zones, i.e., the territorial waters, 12 nautical miles from the baselines, contiguous zone, 24 nautical miles from the baselines, exclusive economic zone, 200 nautical miles from the baselines, and continental shelves that UNCLOS 3 delimits. UNCLOS 3 was the culmination of decades-long negotiations among United Nations members to codify norms regulating the conduct of states in the world's oceans and submarine areas, recognizing coastal and archipelagic states graduated authority over a limited span of waters and submarine lands along their coasts. On the other hand, baselines laws such as RA 9522 are enacted by UNCLOS 3 states parties to mark out specific base points along their coasts from which baselines are drawn, either straight or contoured, to serve as geographic starting points to measure the breadth of the maritime zones and continental shelf. Article 48 of UNCLOS 3 on archipelagic states like ours could not be any clearer. Article 48. Measurement of the breadth of the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf. The breadth of the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf shall be measured from archipelagic baselines drawn in accordance with Article 47. Emphasis supplied. Thus, baselines laws are nothing but statutory mechanisms for UNCLOS 3 states parties to delimit with precision the extent of their maritime zones and continental shelves. In turn, this gives notice to the rest of the international community of the scope of the maritime space and submarine areas within which states parties exercise treaty-based rights, namely, the exercise of sovereignty over territorial waters, Article 2. The jurisdiction to enforce customs, fiscal, immigration, and sanitation laws in the contiguous zone, Article 33, and the right to exploit the living and non-living resources in the exclusive economic zone, Article 56, and continental shelf. Article 77. Even under petitioners' theory that the Philippine territory embraces the islands and all the waters within the rectangular area delimited in the Treaty of Paris, The baselines of the Philippines would still have to be drawn in accordance with RA 9522 because this is the only way to draw the baselines in conformity with UNCLOS 3. The baselines cannot be drawn from the boundaries or other portions of the rectangular area delineated in the Treaty of Paris, but from the outermost islands and drying reefs of the archipelago. UNCLOS 3 and its ancillary baselines laws play no role in the acquisition, enlargement or, as petitioners claim, diminution of territory. Under traditional international law typology, states acquire, or conversely, lose, territory through occupation, accretion, cession and prescription, not by executing multilateral treaties on the regulations of sea use rights or enacting statutes to comply with the treaty's terms to delimit maritime zones and continental shelves. Territorial claims to land features are outside UNCLOS 3 and are instead governed by the rules on general international law. RA 9522's use of the framework of regime of islands to determine the maritime zones of the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal, not inconsistent with the Philippines' claim of sovereignty over these areas. Petitioners next submit that RA 9522's use of UNCLOS 3's regime of islands framework to draw the baselines, and to measure the breadth of the applicable maritime zones of the KIG, weakens our territorial claim over that area. Petitioners add that the KIG's and Scarborough Shoal's exclusion from the Philippine archipelagic baselines results in the loss of about 15,000 square nautical miles of territorial waters, prejudicing the livelihood of subsistence fishermen. A comparison of the configuration of the baselines drawn under RA 3046 and RA 9522 and the extent of maritime space encompassed by each law, coupled with a reading of the text of RA 9522 and its congressional deliberations, vis-a-vis the Philippines' obligations under UNCLOS 3, belie this viewpoint 1 of V1. The configuration of the baselines drawn under RA 3046 and RA 9522 shows that RA 9522 merely followed the base points mapped by RA 3046, save for at least 9 base points that RA 9522 skipped to optimize the location of base points and adjust the length of one baseline, and thus comply with UNCLOS 3's limitation on the maximum length of baselines. Under RA 3046, as under RA 9522, the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal lie outside of the baselines drawn around the Philippine archipelago. This undeniable cartographic fact takes the wind out of petitioners' argument branding RA 9522 as a statutory renunciation of the Philippines' claim over the KIG, assuming that baselines are relevant for this purpose. Petitioners' assertion of loss of about 15,000 square nautical miles of territorial waters under RA 9522 is similarly unfounded both in fact and law. On the contrary, RA 9522, by optimizing the location of base points, increased the Philippines' total maritime space, covering its internal waters, territorial sea and exclusive economic zone, by 145,216 square nautical miles, as shown in the table below. Extent of maritime area using RA 3046, as amended, taking into account the Treaty of Paris delimitation in square nautical miles. Extent of maritime area using RA 9522, taking into account UNCLOS 3 in square nautical miles. Internal or archipelagic waters. 166,858. 171,435. Territorial sea. 274,136. 32,106. Exclusive economic zone. 382,669. Total. 440,994. 586,210. Thus, as the map below shows, the reach of the exclusive economic zone drawn under RA 9522 even extends way beyond the waters covered by the rectangular demarcation under the Treaty of Paris. Of course, where there are overlapping exclusive economic zones of opposite or adjacent states, there will have to be a delineation of maritime boundaries in accordance with UNCLOS 3. Further, petitioners' argument that the KIG now lies outside Philippine territory because the baselines that RA 9522 draws do not enclose the KIG is negated by RA 9522 itself. Section 2 of the law commits to text the Philippines' continued claim of sovereignty and jurisdiction over the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal. SEC 2. The baselines in the following areas over which the Philippines likewise exercises sovereignty and jurisdiction shall be determined as a regime of islands under the Republic of the Philippines consistent with Article 121 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. A. The Calayan Island Group as constituted under Presidential Decree No. 1596 and B. Bajo the Masinloc, also known as Scarborough Shoal. Emphasis supplied. Had Congress in RA 9522 enclosed the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal as part of the Philippine archipelago, adverse legal effects would have ensued. The Philippines would have committed a breach of two provisions of UNCLOS 3. First, Article 47(3) of UNCLOS 3 requires that the drawing of such baselines shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. Second, Article 47(2) of UNCLOS 3 requires that the length of the baselines shall not exceed 100 nautical miles, save for 3% of the total number of baselines which can reach up to 125 nautical miles. Although the Philippines has consistently claimed sovereignty over the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal for several decades, these outlying areas are located at an appreciable distance from the nearest shoreline of the Philippine archipelago, such that any straight baseline loped around them from the nearest base point will inevitably depart to an appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. The principal sponsor of RA 9522 in the Senate, Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, took pains to emphasize the foregoing during the Senate deliberations. What we call the Calayan Island Group or what the rest of the world call the Spratlys and the Scarborough Shoal are outside our archipelagic baseline because if we put them inside our baselines we might be accused of violating the provision of international law which states, the drawing of such baseline shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. So sa lub ing ating baseline, dapat magalapit ang mga islands. Dahil malayo ang Scarborough Shoal, hindi natin masasabing malapit sila sa atin although we are still allowed by international law to claim them as our own. This is called contested islands outside our configuration. We see that our archipelago is defined by the orange line which we call archipelagic baseline. Ngayon, tingnan ninyo ang maliit na circle dun sa itas, that is Scarborough Shoal, itong malaking circle sa ibaba, that is Calayan Group or the Spratlys. Malayo na sila sa ating archipelago kaya kang ilihis pa natin ang dating archipelagic baselines para lamang masama itong dalawang circles. Hindi na sila magalapit at baka hindi na tatanggapin in United Nations because of the rule that it should follow the natural configuration of the archipelago. Emphasis supplied. Similarly, the length of one baseline that RA 3046 drew exceeded UNCLOS 3's limits. 1 F won the need to shorten this baseline, and in addition, to optimize the location of base points using current maps, became imperative as discussed by respondents. The amendment of the baselines law was necessary to enable the Philippines to draw the outer limits of its maritime zones including the extended continental shelf in the manner provided by Article 47 of UNCLOS 3. As defined by RA 3046, as amended by RA 5446, the baselines suffer from some technical deficiencies, to wit. 1. The length of the baseline across Morro Gulf, from middle of Three Rock awash to Tonquil Point is 140.06 nautical miles. This exceeds the maximum length allowed under Article 47(2) of the UNCLOS 3, which states that the length of such baselines shall not exceed 100 nautical miles, except that up to 3% of the total number of baselines enclosing any archipelago may exceed that length, up to a maximum length of 125 nautical miles. 2. The selection of base points is not optimal. At least 9 base points can be skipped or deleted from the baseline system. This will enclose an additional 2,195 nautical miles of water. 3. Finally, the base points were drawn from maps existing in 1968 and not established by geodetic survey methods. Accordingly, some of the points, particularly along the west coast of Luzon down to Palawan, were later found to be located either inland or on water, not on low water line and drying reefs as prescribed by Article 47. Hence, far from surrendering the Philippines' claim over the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal, Congress's decision to classify the KIG and the Scarborough Shoal as regime S of islands under the Republic of the Philippines consistent with Article 121 of UNCLOS 3 manifests the Philippine state's responsible observance of its Pacta Sunt Serv and the obligation under UNCLOS 3. Under Article 121 of UNCLOS 3, any naturally formed area of land surrounded by water, which is above water at high tide, such as portions of the KIG, qualifies under the category of regime of islands, whose islands generate their own applicable maritime zones. Statutory claim over Saba under RA 5446 retained. Petitioner's argument for the invalidity of RA 9522 for its failure to textualize the Philippines' claim over Saba in North Borneo is also untenable. Section 2 of RA 5446, which RA 9522 did not repeal, keeps open the door for drawing the baselines of Saba. Section 2. The definition of the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippine archipelago as provided in this act is without prejudice to the delineation of the baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Saba, situated in North Borneo, over which the Republic of the Philippines has acquired dominion and sovereignty. Emphasis supplied. UNCLOS 3 and RA 9522 not incompatible with the Constitution's delineation of internal waters. As their final argument against the validity of RA 9522, petitioners contend that the law unconstitutionally converts internal waters into archipelagic waters, hence subjecting these waters to the right of innocent and sea lanes passage under UNCLOS 3, including overflight. Petitioners extrapolate that these passage rights indubitably expose Philippine internal waters to nuclear and maritime pollution hazards, in violation of the Constitution. Whether referred to as Philippine internal waters under Article 1 of the Constitution or as archipelagic waters under UNCLOS 3, Article 49(1), the Philippines exercises sovereignty over the body of water lying landward of the baselines, including the airspace over it and the submarine areas underneath. UNCLOS 3 affirms this. Article 49. Legal status of archipelagic waters, of the airspace over archipelagic waters and of their bed and subsoil. 1. The sovereignty of an archipelagic state extends to the waters enclosed by the archipelagic baselines drawn in accordance with Article 47, described as archipelagic waters, regardless of their depth or distance from the coast. 2. This sovereignty extends to the airspace over the archipelagic waters, as well as to their bed and subsoil, and the resources contained therein. 4. The regime of archipelagic sea lanes passage established in this part shall not in other respects affect the status of the archipelagic waters, including the sea lanes, or the exercise by the archipelagic state of its sovereignty over such waters and their airspace, bed and subsoil, and the resources contained therein. Emphasis supplied. The fact of sovereignty, however, does not preclude the operation of municipal and international law norms subjecting the territorial sea or archipelagic waters to necessary, if not marginal, burdens in the interest of maintaining unimpeded, expeditious international navigation, consistent with the international law principle of freedom of navigation. Thus, domestically, the political branches of the Philippine government, in the competent discharge of their constitutional powers, may pass legislation designating routes within the archipelagic waters to regulate innocent and sea lanes passage. Indeed, bills drawing nautical highways for sea lanes passage are now pending in Congress. In the absence of municipal legislation, international law norms, now codified in UNCLOS 3, operate to grant innocent passage rights over the territorial sea or archipelagic waters, subject to the treaty's limitations and conditions for their exercise. Significantly, the right of innocent passage is a customary international law, thus automatically incorporated in the corpus of Philippine law. No modern state can validly invoke its sovereignty to absolutely forbid innocent passage that is exercised in accordance with customary international law without risking retaliatory measures from the international community. The fact that for archipelagic states, their archipelagic waters are subject to both the right of innocent passage and sea lanes passage does not place them in lesser footing vis-a-vis continental coastal states which are subject, in their territorial sea, to the right of innocent passage and the right of transit passage through international straits. The imposition of these passage rights through archipelagic waters under UNCLOS 3 was a concession by archipelagic states, in exchange for their right to claim all the waters landward of their baselines, regardless of their depth or distance from the coast, as archipelagic waters subject to their territorial sovereignty. More importantly, the recognition of archipelagic states' archipelago and the waters enclosed by their baselines as one cohesive entity prevents the treatment of their islands as separate islands under UNCLOS 3. Separate islands generate their own maritime zones, placing the waters between islands separated by more than 24 nautical miles beyond the state's territorial sovereignty, subjecting these waters to the rights of other states under UNCLOS 3. Petitioners' invocation of non-executory constitutional provisions in Article 2, Declaration of Principles and State Policies, must also fail. Our present state of jurisprudence considers the provisions in Article 2 as mere legislative guides, which, absent enabling legislation, do not embody judicially enforceable constitutional rights. Article 2 provisions serve as guides in formulating and interpreting implementing legislation, as well as in interpreting executory provisions of the Constitution. Although opposa v. facto ren treated the right to a healthful and balanced ecology under Section 16 of Article 2 as an exception, the present petition lacks factual basis to substantiate the claimed constitutional violation. The other provisions petitioners cite, relating to the protection of marine wealth, Article 12, Section 2, Paragraph 2, and subsistence fishermen, Article 13, Section 7, are not violated by RA 9522. In fact, the demarcation of the baselines enables the Philippines to delimit its exclusive economic zone, reserving solely to the Philippines the exploitation of all living and non-living resources within such zone. Such a maritime delineation binds the international community since the delineation is in strict observance of UNCLOS 3. If the maritime delineation is contrary to UNCLOS 3, the international community will of course reject it and will refuse to be bound by it. UNCLOS 3 favors states with a long coastline like the Philippines. UNCLOS 3 creates a sui generis maritime space, the exclusive economic zone, in waters previously part of the high seas. UNCLOS 3 grants new rights to coastal states to exclusively exploit the resources found within this zone up to 200 nautical miles. UNCLOS 3, however, preserves the traditional freedom of navigation of other states that attach to this zone beyond the territorial sea before UNCLOS 3. RA 9522 and the Philippines Maritime Zones. Petitioners hold the view that, based on the permissive text of UNCLOS 3, Congress was not bound to pass RA 9522. We have looked at the relevant provision of UNCLOS 3 and we find petitioners' reading plausible. Nevertheless, the prerogative of choosing this option belongs to Congress, not to this court. Moreover, the luxury of choosing this option comes at a very steep price. Absent an UNCLOS 3 compliant baselines law, an archipelagic state like the Philippines will find itself devoid of internationally acceptable baselines from where the breadth of its maritime zones and continental shelf is measured. This is recipe for a two-fronted disaster. First, it sends an open invitation to the seafaring powers to freely enter and exploit the resources in the waters and submarine areas around our archipelago, and second, it weakens the country's case in any international dispute over Philippine maritime space. These are consequences Congress wisely avoided. The enactment of UNCLOS 3 compliant baselines law for the Philippine archipelago and adjacent areas, as embodied in RA 9522, allows an internationally recognized delimitation of the breadth of the Philippines' maritime zones and continental shelf. RA 9522 is therefore a most vital step on the part of the Philippines in safeguarding its maritime zones, consistent with the Constitution and our national interest. Wherefore, we dismiss the petition. So ordered. Antonio T. Carpio, Associate Justice. We concur. Renato C. Corona, Chief Justice. Presbitero J. Velasco, Jr., Associate Justice. Teresita J. Leonardo D. E. Castro, Associate Justice. Arturo D. Bryan, Associate Justice. Diosdado M. Peralta, Associate Justice. Lucas P. Bersamin, Associate Justice. Mariano C. Del Castillo, Associate Justice. Roberto A. Abad, Associate Justice. Martin S. Villarama, Jr., Associate Justice. Jose Portugal Perez, Associate Justice. Jose C. Mendoza, Associate Justice. Maria Lourdes P. A. Sereno, Associate Justice. CERTIFICATION. Pursuant to Section 13, Article 8 of the Constitution, I certify that the conclusions in the above decision had been reached in consultation before the case was assigned to the writer of the opinion of the Court. Renato C. Corona, Chief Justice.